how do you actually build long-term wealth in Switzerland? This is something that I wanted to talk about today because normally I tend to talk about home ownership topics, which has to do with personal wealth building, but I wanted to widen the scope a little bit more and also to look at some of the statistics that I found. So let's jump right in to the topic and get started. So the average wealth in Switzerland is 560,000. And that sounds like a very high number, but averages lie because in Switzerland, these statistics are heavily skewed by the fact that there are many very ultra high net worth individuals living here due to many reasons, but we won't get into that right now. But these sort of 1%er individuals kind of skew that statistic. So a more reliable number to look at is the median wealth, which then actually drops down to 150,000 francs. So how is it possible actually that in a country with the highest salaries worldwide, how is it possible that the median wealth is only 150,000 francs? And I have my own opinions, of course, but I did want to look at some of the statistical evidence that's available. So I looked at some of the numbers from the Swiss Federal Statistical Office, and according to these statistics, the average gross income here in Switzerland is between 10 to 12,000 francs per month. And that sounds like a very, very high number at first glance until we get into the deductions. So out of that number, first of all, we need to subtract about 20% for mandatory contributions. So Social Security and taxes, that's about 20% of that gone. Then around 7 to 9% will go into your mandatory health insurance. The statistical office actually gave a much smaller number for this, but I accounted about 20 to 30% towards housing and utilities. This depends heavily on whether you live alone or if you live in a couple or with roommates or family or whatever. If you live alone, you will easily spend 30% of your income on rent if you live in a big city like Zurich or Geneva. Then a further 12 to 15% on food, and lastly, between 10 and 14% on transport. So basically, then the Federal Statistical Office has reported that the average savings rate in Switzerland is between 13 and 15%. And that isn't a lot considering how much people earn. So this basically is at the core of what I wanted to talk about today. Now, I want to preface this a little bit by saying that there are different phases in life, like when you have very young children who are in daycare, which is extremely expensive in this country, and other phases in life where you need to spend more money. But if we just think about the fact that we have the highest salaries in the world and the savings rate is that low, there's got to be other things going on and underlying that. Okay, so this is something that I talked about on my channel before, but for me, honestly, talking especially about big cities and especially also expats and how their spending habits change when they move to Switzerland and after a while get used to a certain baseline salary, your lifestyle starts creeping upwards. And this is very dangerous if you think about it in the long term, because you have a few earning years where you're really at the top of your potential. Usually people experience different phases in life where they have to go through unemployment, or they have children and they tap out for a little bit and take some time off. Whatever the case may be, if your baseline burn rate is contingent on you having the maximum possible earnings at all times, then you aren't building wealth. You're just spending more money. Because, the number one thing to bear in mind is that wealth is the money that you don't spend. And there was, a few years ago, one of the biggest Swiss banks called Credit Suisse. I'm sure all of you have heard of it, but I want to explain a little bit for the overseas viewers what happened here in Switzerland. So a few years ago, Credit Suisse, which was one of the two biggest banks in Switzerland, went under and was then acquired by UBS. But this meant that overnight, basically, thousands of people experienced job insecurity. And this didn't just affect the mid-tier employees, right? Actually, the highly senior roles were kind of even first on the chopping block, because these sorts of situations tend to be very political in big banks and large corporations. So if you think about those very high earning executives, they tend to have also a very high baseline burn rate. So over time, you get like fancier and more expensive cars. You upgrade to live in a more expensive neighborhood. You send your kids to private school. You vacation in fancy ski resorts, and so on and so forth. And all of this requires that baseline salary, which is extremely high. And if you're not always going to be earning that amount, and if you're spending most of that money, then you're not building a lot of wealth. So then this brings us back to the average savings rate of 13.15%. Yes, if you are a low income earner and you try to invest the little bit that you can, it makes sense. But if you are a high earning executive and you're making between 500,000 to $1 million a year, then 13 to 15% isn't really enough, because you're spending all of your money basically on just lifestyle. And so that's why I wanted to talk a little bit about the few things that I see as very crucial to actually building long-term wealth here in Switzerland. So let's start with those. So then let's get into the specific points that I think have to be brought up in relation to building wealth here in Switzerland. So firstly, home ownership, whether it makes sense or not, I think it depends. So you have to base your decision on what type of person you are. So obviously, if you are a Swiss person who has always lived in Switzerland and will always stay in Switzerland, then yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense, actually. If you are a senior executive or, a sort of upwardly mobile expat, then it probably doesn't make sense, because as I was saying in relation to those Credit Suisse executives, you have to kind of move based on where the opportunities are, because you are not going to have enough opportunities in a single job market. So if you are at that sort of level, then maybe in a couple of years you might have to move to London or to Singapore or wherever, and then it doesn't make sense, because first of all, it's home ownership is illiquid. You can't sell it that quickly or easily, and there are a lot of costs that you have to front. I've talked about those on my channel, so please check out the videos that I've made about how to buy a property in Switzerland. But without getting into too much detail here, you basically you have a lot of costs like notary costs and other costs like that you have to front, which bring up the initial costs of acquiring property here in Switzerland. So if you don't plan on living in that property for an extended period of time, then it probably doesn't make sense in terms of wealth building. The next point is to set yourself a cost ceiling, and I think this is really important at every income level so that your spending doesn't get out of control, because while it allows you some guilt-free spending because you've set yourself a ceiling, and if you're like under budget 1 month, then you can go out to eat to a more expensive restaurant with friends or whatever you would like to do with that money, right? But that you actually have set yourself this cost ceiling, and that you then ensure that you don't go over it and that you stick to your budget each and every month. The second one has to do with the previous point. So here in Switzerland, you have zero capital gains tax, and this definitely isn't the case in a lot of countries. So this is something that you should absolutely take advantage of living in Switzerland. So instead of, if you've set your cost ceiling and then you have a certain amount of money that you want to save and invest, you should definitely make sure to have that invested, because there is no high yield savings accounts here in Switzerland. You do need to invest in some way in order to beat inflation and not have the value of your money go down significantly over time. So this is one of the core tools here that will allow you to do that, because it really, like I said, it really isn't the case in many countries. Most countries do have capital gains tax. So this is what I would highly encourage people living here in Switzerland to do. The fourth point would be to max out your third pillar every year, and then to make any possible voluntary buy-ins to your second pillar, which is the pension that both you and your employer contribute to. And this is because you get the tax advantage, and then it's also invested. So it's kind of a dual gain that you get there. And the final point, I think, is to set yourself like an escape number. And here I'm referring to the financial independence, retire early movement. I don't mean it in that kind of way. I know that's not the goal for everyone, and I don't think it should necessarily be everyone's goal. You don't necessarily have to retire early, but you could still take advantage of having responsible spending habits and at least trying to attain some financial independence. So I don't think it's a zero-sum game, right? Because with the FIRE community, I think it's very absolutist, and it just doesn't work for everyone. So I feel like it can also be a little bit alienating, because not everyone wants to make the extreme sacrifices that FIRE would require out of them, right? But you can still do something. So that's why I may be more interested in talking about responsible spending and drifting a little bit away from this idea that like this escape number has to be, until you reach it, you're not allowed to do anything else, and you have to like use the same keyboard for 25 years. I think you get my point, right? What I want to kind of reinforce here with regard to the escape number is more so that you should view your high salary here in Switzerland is kind of like a venture capitalist, like funding your future. So in Switzerland, you don't have employee protections that are as strong as in, for example, Germany or in the Nordic countries. So you could also lose that salary. And what happens then? So this is why I think it's important when you do have a high salary to take advantage of saving and investing aggressively, because you won't always be able to do that in every life situation. So I would love to hear from you, especially if you live in Switzerland, but even if you don't, I would really like to hear whether you have any thoughts about what I talked about during this video, especially about lifestyle inflation. I think I am in a way talking out of like a bubble of like expat corporate people that live in big cities in Switzerland. So I am aware that my view is somewhat biased and can be a little bit skewed into that direction. And so that's why I would love to hear from anyone else what your thoughts are. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye.